can continue to replay in a person's thoughts. These are the things that we talk about when we encourage them to go to counseling, because these are things that can be oftentimes a hindrance for their healing and their development. Any other thoughts?
Yes, just a quick question. Violence, how does Refuge House define just violence without attaching emotional, sexual, physical? How do they just define violence?
Okay.
And I have a part B.
Okay, so Refuge House defines violence as any unwanted contact, hit, strike, comment that the person did not want. Anything. So even, for example, when we talk about sexual violence, even when I have some students that oftentimes they're very loving, right? They want to hug you every time they see you, but even that can be violent, right? Because at that particular point, I didn't ask for your hug. I didn't ask for your touch. Gain consent at that particular point. So that too can be unwanted. Just a simple hug. Okay.
Uh, isn't violence most sometimes perpetrated by even parents and not necessarily by, a significant other?
So violence can be perpetrated by anyone, okay? And that's a common myth and that's a common misconception, right? That we often think that it's only just between those who are in some type of romantic interaction. No. So domestic violence means that we actually live in a dwelling together, and violence perpetrated is between those two individuals who actually are knowing of one another. So, for example, domestic violence could be a mother against the son. It could be a son against the mother. It doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic interaction. Violence is just an actual strike, a hit, any type of physical, emotional intimidation to cause harm. Okay? So, the way I explain this to a lot of people is this: violence itself is control around power and control, right? Those two main words. So when you hear the word power, what's the first thing that popped in your mind? When I said the word power, what's the very first thing you thought about? Say it again. A train. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna link that in a minute. Okay, she said a train. All right. Any other thoughts? When I said the word power, what's the first thing that happened in your mind? What's the first thing you thought about? Control. What else? Authority. What else? Train. Okay. Yes. Say it again.
Strength.
Strength. Okay. All right. So when we take those things, power, control, intimidation, a train, right? So we are taking the fact that you have the ability, someone who is stronger, bigger, larger, maybe there's a different mental incapacity there, any type of authority at that particular moment that you're using to control and to cause intimidation or harm to someone else. That's how we define violence. And the different types, what we all know: physical, financial, emotional, those are the types. Okay. But you're trying to cause harm, intimidation, make someone feel belittled, make someone feel uncomfortable in the person who they are. That's what we talk about when we're discussing harm. All right, so when we talk about violence, right? So tonight is all about mainly domestic violence, right? We want to educate about that. We are going to talk about sexual violence as well. Domestic violence is what we consider a pattern of abuse, right? In any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner, okay? Violence can also be dating. Domestic violence is also, as I said before, between those who live in the same dwelling or home amongst one another. We all know that domestic violence happens, right, in statistics. It's against women and men. We know that violence has no socioeconomic status, it has no gender relation, it has no race, any of those. 1 in 3 women actually will experience some type of violence in their lives. And typically, we know that from the statistics, typically by the age of 30. Women, 1 in 3. So even if I look right here in the room, there's about 5 or 6 women of us. 1 in 3, that means that there's at least 2 of you in here that have or will experience some type of violence in your lifetime. And so, as an advocate, I look at that and you say, okay, well, that's only 2, but that's 2 too many. And so we want to talk about what does that look like. The statistics for men is 1 in 4. And typically with men, we are under the impression that we actually think the number is greater, right? Because why? Exactly, absolutely. Oftentimes, that's a stigma around men being able to discuss that, right? We kind of put that on our society to tell men that they ought to be strong and that there shouldn't be any type of, that, there's no failure within them and that there's no conversation, that they're less than, they're less superiority if they're discussing any type of anything that makes them vulnerable. And so oftentimes, men are in our vulnerable populations that have, that often do not report, right? And so we are under the impression that that number is actually a little bit higher. So it would probably be like 1 in 2 or 1 in 3. A third of all, so 1/3 of all female homicides were killed by an intimate partner. So what that means is when we talk about the actual fatality rate, so the amount of women or men who may have died actually at the hands of their partner. Okay? And so interestingly, when we talk about what intimate partner look like, something that I'm actually really, really excited about is that Refuge House has done within the last 3 or 4 years is we have a new program called Invest. That is a collaboration with Leon County Sheriff's Department, and so that's actually perpetrator accountability. This is new, so this is instead of always following the person who's been abused, our actual survivor, we're actually following those persons who are perpetrating the violence and making them much more accountable for their actions and their behavior. So, really excited about that. I saw a hand that way.
Is there any place for men who are victims?
So our shelters house men as of right now. Our services are open to men. Interestingly, one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years is that we've been looking at how are we addressing men in our society, right? How are we having a conversation with them to get them to feel much more comfortable about coming forward following the violences that they have experienced, and having those conversations to talk about what does that look like for men. Because what you will find out is that men are abused, and that's usually a myth. A lot of times we feel like men aren't abused. They are. Men can be physically hit on. Men are emotionally abused. Men are financially abused. And oftentimes, a lot of men I see experience abuse when it comes to their children. So oftentimes their partner will take or use their children as a means of intimidation in the relationship. Or you can't see your children once we've removed ourselves from the relationship. So oftentimes we find that our men are just as much in places of violence and abuse as we see as women as well.
Is that correct? 1/3 of all female homicides were killed by an intimate partner?
Absolutely. We see it all the time. We've had it here, even at Refuge House. In the time that I've been here, of course, I can't discuss those particular incidents, but absolutely, yes, that is something that definitely does occur, and unfortunately, on a normal occasion like that, that is regular. Absolutely.
Does that number include both men and women?
No, so that was just for women. And the reason why oftentimes those numbers are different is because most of the time men are the abusing offender, right? Most of the time that is where that happens, unfortunately. But that is true. Men are killed as well.
No, what I'm asking is the person doing the perpetrating of the killing, is it both men and women?
In that particular statistic, no.
Okay.
I thought you were asking if do men also, as well as women, perpetuate violence? Yes, absolutely. And it does happen and it does occur. That particular statistic is just majority of women, again, because most of the time men are the offending, but no, that isn't. So, I want to do a quick breakout fun session, right? So, here is my fun trusty wheel, right? It has all types of different questions on it, and these are fun things that people always just kind of want to ask. So, anybody feel adventurous to come up, spin the wheel, and let's answer that question? Anybody feel adventurous? Just come spin the wheel. Okay. Let's spin the wheel, and then I'll answer your question. I'll be right back to you. It's crazy. Don't pin any of mine. All right. So what's the question? What does it say? Okay. So we're gonna come back to that. All right. What was your question?
Um, what could you advise me as a Christian and with the spiritual? Because I'm from the Caribbean and I have grown up. My dad doesn't put his hand on my mom, but emotionally, I've grown up where verbally my dad, and how we were taught in ministry that as long as the person don't put their hand on you, that is not abuse. And I have experienced this in my marriage, so I personally experienced that. And you go for help. I have called your ministry before, Refuge, and how I came to the knowledge of emotional abuse is because I almost lost my life through the whole process. And the counselor that was working with me on my insurance told me that you need help. And I said, no, I don't need help. She said, yes, you need help because this is an emotional abuse. I called your refugee. Someone decided that they would have counseled me, and they never did. And I think it's more people put more emphasis on the rape case than emotional part of it. And I never got counseling from your area with emotional. And being in ministry, that is something that has never been taught, how to handle emotional abuse. And I know I've been in it for years and asked for help, and nobody helped me because they think that you're supernatural, that you know earthly good, and you be crying out and nobody sees that because you don't walk with a bruise on your hand. How would you deal with someone in the church who you don't see abuse on their hand, but emotionally behind the scene they're dying? I actually had to make a choice in my life. I was in the hospital, and the doctor said, this, you gotta make a decision. Either you get help or you die. So how would I wasn't physically hit, but I've been hitting emotionally through the whole time.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, first off, I appreciate you sharing that. That's always a very hard place to be able to share your own individual experiences. So thank you very much for being vulnerable here in this space to be able to share. And I do apologize if my agency has not served you in the way that we should have. We are always seeking to strive to be better. In terms of emotional abuse, again, we see emotional abuse just as strongly as we do physical abuse. Naturally, if you're physically abused, if you're bleeding from every physical orifice, we do want to get you some type of help medically and so forth. But just like I said before, I've had many survivors who have said that it took a longer time to heal from the emotional abuse than it did the physical abuse. So we do offer short-term and long-term counseling. So we have advocates that would see you maybe over like a 6-week period. And you would schedule those appointments through our outreach counseling. Typically what happens is you would want to call our crisis hotline. That number is 24 hours. They would make a referral for you to our outreach counselor, and then from there, the counselor would set up an appointment at your convenience. And then from there, after the 6-week to 8-week time, sometimes some counselors do 6, sometimes some do 8. Then if you still feel like, yes, no, I need to talk longer, then we would refer you to our therapist. and they would do extended counseling, and some have seen that therapist for up from 1 to 2 or 3 years. Um, and one of the things that I think many of our survivors appreciate is the fact that, unlike many other agencies, we not only just discuss, how are you coping with the violence, but also how are you able to heal? In other words, like, what are you doing? Are we able to return to work? Are you feeling like back to a sense of healthiness? Does that make sense? So, like, how is life progressing for you? So, not only discussing and talking about the violence and the abuse that you've endured or witnessed or went through, but also where is your coping and how are you healing from that? So, I'm here and available to be able to discuss that further with you and get you connected with those advocates who would be able to. We see clients. It doesn't matter if you were a victim yesterday or a victim 10 years ago. At any point in time, if you are ever in either services, we are here and available. And again, those services are free of charge. So we definitely do take emotional abuse just as important as we do physical abuse. Any other questions, thoughts before we move forward? Any other thoughts?
A part of her question, I think it wasn't answered. Maybe I could be misunderstanding, but what she's asking is, as a Christian woman, how do you address that issue? How do you decide when to pray or when to seek help from the refuge center, for example? How do you decide at what point is it too much to say, okay, could this be just a test from the devil to break up my marriage, or is this something that I need to right, and a lot of it, especially in the church community, emotional, and especially in the Caribbean too, emotional abuse is not, the attention is not paid to emotional abuse so much as to physical abuse. So what she's asking is, as a Christian woman, not just as any woman, because as a non-Christian woman, the first thing they're going to think about is running to the refuge house. But as a Christian woman, when do you decide to, okay, yes, I need to run and I need to pray, but at what point do I, or how do you as a Christian in that institution advise women then, all right, do you pray? Do you pray and seek help from the refuge house? When do you decide, or how do you advise Christian women?
Right.
And you mentioned faith-based. As a Christian, what's the first thing that you would do?
Okay.
And not to ignore the fact that, okay, we need to run to God, but at what point do we decide on that?
Right. Okay. Well, that's
And another thing also, not to give, especially if you're in the church setting, and I know she mentioned that, they were in the church setting, how do you decide and when to go to someone outside of the church because you want to, I guess, keep the business hush-hush in the church, not to give a bad example of Christian men then, and to be your brother's keeper and to know that, okay, all right, if this person is having an issue, should I go to my pastor or should I run to the refuge house?
Okay. So as a Christian woman, I look at help, advice, assistance outside of God as it being God sent as a Christian woman. So, for example, if I'm praying about whatever the case may be, or in this particular case, violence. So at that particular point, naturally, as a Christian woman, my first thing is to fall to my knees in prayer, to seek my word, to be able to be in consecration with God. And I think at that particular point, when you are able to say, Lord, I need to talk to someone, Lord, I need to speak with someone, it doesn't mean that you are not admonishing God and what he is in your life. I think that the surgeons, I think that the people who work at the refuge house and anywhere else that are Christians feel like God have led them to be able to do this work. I feel like he has me. That because of my Christianity, that doesn't negate the ability that I'm looking to seek God first in all things. So I personally don't despair a separacy in that regard, that if I seek this help from somewhere, that all of a sudden that's a lack in God. Because more importantly, I'm believing that God has sent me to this place. I have been praying about what it is that I am seeking Him for. I am in need, God, right now. I am in this relationship. I'm in this situation. I'm being abused by my daddy. Whatever the case may be, I am trusting that when He has said, okay, now you can go to pastor for conference and counsel, that is Him sending you there. Okay, now that when I go to Refuge House or anywhere else, that He is now sending me to a godly place. He is now sending me to a Christian place, or He is sending me to a place where I'm going to get the healing and that I need. Not forgetting that once I leave that counseling session, I'm about to go back home and get back on my knees again. So I personally don't feel that because I seek help somewhere else, that's not dismonishing God. That's just I know that He has sent me there because I've asked Him in godly prayer and godly counsel that this is where He's sending me, because I am trusting that where He's sending me, that this is what He has for me, and this is the place that it would be. Does that make sense? As far as you were talking about with the being in the Caribbean, we do see that quite a bit in violence. Like, so many different persons who have experienced violence, they often talk about what that looks like because of their culture, their race. This is the reason why I stayed in it. As an advocate, that's a personal choice and a personal decision. I'm going to encourage you that I'm here and available. I'm here and our services are available. But at the end of the day, we also have an empowerment base. So meaning that I want you to seek services if and when you are ready, because I see it too often that survivors seek services before they are ready. And I think that it disencourages the value of the services that they receive, as well as the help and the whole entire timeline of when they receive the healing. And now I'm in a new place, right? I've moved on from that at that point.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Just from counseling position with my wife, with respect to intervention, would you say that during an argument, when it escalates from to shouting and then to using language the Apostle Peter used, so to speak, you know what I'm talking about, and then you violate people's space, would you, what, because you see the progression, you see the raising of the voice, using, adopting Peter's language, and Apostle Peter, sorry about that, but, and then you violate the person's space, what comes next? What would you advise on that? I'm just, we've gone through that, and I want to hear your side of that.
So it sounds like you're asking me that at what point should I encourage a survivor to leave? Personally, when you see the first red flag, you need to scroll on. Let me say that more professional. When you notice the first inconsistency and red flag in the interaction, then at that particular point. So when we talk about red flags, if you're with someone who puts you down, if you're with someone who there's always a power struggle between the two of you, that it's never an encouragement, it's never a positive interaction. It seems like it's not, in terms of relationships, it's not teamwork, that we're not working together, there's a common goal. At that particular point, that should be some of your first red flag. When we talk about physical, so pinching of one another, just like partial slaps on the arm, maybe just like hitting on the head, or just, you know, how somebody knock you that way or push you like that on your head. Just those small things that we think, oh, those are just jokes, or it just was playful touch. That's not playful, not to me. When we talk about violence in general, even when I teach my kids, if all of y'all are joking about it, that's something different. If it's no longer a joke, then that's a red flag. If we've gotten to the point of shouting and yelling and we can't ever seem to get along, we should definitely find some other ways. At that particular point, I normally encourage people that if you feel like you can go to counseling, start there. If you want to move on at that particular point, I think that it's important for people to understand their situation and what is best for them. I never tell a survivor that you have to leave. I encourage them that is this the best for you? And the reason why I say that, because think about it, all of us, if you all, I mean, I don't think there's not one person here in this room that hasn't had a friend, a family, or somebody that they know that has been in some type of unhealthy relationship. I'm sure every one of you can raise your hand in here. However, I'm sure that as the friend, you probably continuously encourage them when it first in your mind was like, this doesn't sound like the best situation, right? I'm sure all of you have thought that at one point or another. How did that harm the relationship for them, and to be able to see you as an advocate when you constantly told them that they should leave? What I encourage people to do, and what much of what our agency does, is to tell people to evaluate the relationship for them, okay? Is this a healthy interaction? Is this person encouraging you? Is this person supporting you? Are they praying for your soul as a Christian? Are they praying for your soul? And I say that because even as with my students, I had a student and she was just in this rough relationship, very verbal, a lot of verbal abuse, right? So just as a simple activity, I told her to take out a sheet of paper, right? I told her, draw a line down the middle. I gave her 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Tell me 10 things that you need in a relationship, in an interaction, just a friendship with someone, right? She wrote down 10 things. I need motivation, encouragement, support, pray for me, love me, all these different things. I said, now this individual that's in your life, right? You love this little boy, he's great, he's wonderful, right? She could only write down one thing. I gave her I think I gave her a minute or two. She could only write down one thing and half of another thing in those next few minutes. Out of those 10 things, that person only did one thing for her. And when on the second thing, it was, well, what if they kind of do it? Well, is kind of really doing that? So, out of 10 things that she needed to be healthy in an interaction, she could say this person only did one. So then I can tell you all day long, right, that he ain't no good for you. I can tell you all day long that she's not any good for you. But when she saw it for herself, it was easier. I've been counseling that child for about 3 months. That one activity, the next day she told him bye, because she saw value in her life. She saw value. Okay, so if you married, at that particular point, so personally, if you married, I believe that you're going to continue, if you're a Christian, I think that you're going to continue to pray, right? You're going to seek God first about this relationship. I don't believe that God wants us to stay in an abusive marriage. I don't believe that if he feels love, if he wants to love and hug on you, but I don't see where staying in that marriage and that person is physically harming you, emotionally harming you, so to the point of emotional that I feel like I want to harm myself. I might want to commit suicide or death, or that these things are causing other issues in our body. I'm sure the kids can probably remember Sunday during the conference. Deep talked about unforgiveness, right? And that how unforgiveness and just the way that we talk about certain things, how those things lead to other things, right? So we all know that being in these unhealthy relationships, being in these violent situations, they cause ulcers, they cause headaches, they cause stomach issues, they cause problems with our GI tract, they cause cancer. I truly believe that our body, our nervous system, the stress of it, we feel every bit of that, right? And so I don't believe that that's the life that God would have. I will say that as a Christian, you're going to take time, right? That they're probably going to work on it. You're probably going to go back and forth in that relationship. I say at the first point of abuse, get out. But again, that person needs to see the value in leaving, and that at this particular point, this is it. If you have a awesome, mighty, wonderful, loving God that wants nothing but abundance and love for you, why would I sit around and take this from who you? I mean, that's just me personally. Who you? This awesome, almighty God, why would he subject me to this, right? But here's the other thing, because we've had this conversation before here in a form similarly. Well, now that I'm in this marriage, did I not see those red flags before? 9 times out of 10, you probably married that person and you saw those red flags, but they weren't. They may not have been as large as they are now. They weren't as modest as they are now. So I think oftentimes we get into these relationships and we think that marriage is going to change. We think that in marriage it's going to be different. I think that we feel like, oh, well, that person will see the value in me. That person will see the value in the love in this interaction. But if they didn't already see the love and they weren't trying to work on that beforehand and those red flags were there, I think that's wrong of us as people and humans to then now get in this marriage and say, oh God, and woe is me, did you not love me? Or who am I supposed to remain in this unhealthy relationship? Well, at this point, it is what it is. You're going to pray about it. We're going to move on. And we're going to get this divorce because I'm not going to stay with anybody beating me. But let's be honest in ourselves and realize that when God was throwing those things out, and he was letting us know, and he was helping us to see, were we honestly seeing what he wanted us to see beforehand? Because I'm a firm believer in warning comes before destruction.
And I turned to the counselor and I said, so you think I would have to put up with abuse? And he said, yes. And I told him, you're wasting my time. And I left. If you think about it, so many times you're married to the guy. But unless you tell him, unless you put your foot down, this person can't change. They continue in that sin. That's what I have to say.
I agree with part of that, but the other part of it is that when we say, again, when we talk about the putting the foot down, you can't make anybody do anything. And more importantly, we teach at our agency that violence is, or anything that we do, that's a choice of a person, right? One of the things that's interesting about our agency is, like, for example, you know, a lot of times, like, if there's a rape or if there's a domestic violence or if there's anything going on, okay, well, what's the alcohol or drugs or so forth involved? Okay, here's the other part of that. Those things heighten a situation, right? Those are high-risk behaviors to be indulging in alcohol and drugs and so forth. But those are not the reasons as to why. If that person wanted to hit and strike, they are going to do that. Because I've seen happy drunks. They just happy to be drunk, walk around by themselves. They're not out here harming, hitting anybody. So then that means that if you are perpetuating violence, that is a choice of your own. Any last thoughts? All right, let's move on to sexual violence. Let me get through the rest of it. Yeah, this is all right.
One more comment.
Sure.
I know I'm a spiritual person, and from a Christian perspective, as I experience something, I can share with someone else. I'm a prior warrior from get-go, and when I was going through emotional um, situation, um, I was told that I was told that, oh, you're a Christian, you're a prayer warrior, you should pray. I went into prayer and I never asked God to change my spouse. I asked God to change me because I was told that I was at fault. So when I started to pray about me, I started to see a whole picture of my spouse. And even though I saw it, I was still in denial, battling in my mind whether to stay or die. And I end up going to my leader. My leader said to go back into prayer, go be an obedient little girl, and forget all about that and put on blinders. It reached to a point that God was showing me all of these until when I almost lost my life in the hospital. I had to make a decision. So as I was saying, sometimes emotional abuse, we don't walk with it on our shoulder because nobody sees it because we put on this face that everything is fine. But when you get home, it's a whole different arena. I thank God for what you are doing because honestly, if it wasn't for prayer and fasting, I would not be here today.
I can agree with that. What I would also say to that, you said something really interesting. You said, I change, right? Because we all know that we can't wait on that individual to change. And we can't sit and think that our presence there is going to make them change. So at that particular point, you begin looking to God. You begin looking to Christ for your healing in that particular moment to give you the strength to leave that interaction. And more importantly, to help you leave whoever that was leading you incorrectly. So then again, when we talk about we want life to be different for us, that's the reason why I talk so much about empowering my survivors, to encourage them to say, hey, I want better for me. This is the life that I should live. This is the life that I want. And more importantly, being a Christian shouldn't mean that I should have to endure this type of violence. And whoever said that doesn't know our loving God. So yes, violence is wrong in all areas. So switching gears a little bit, we want to talk about what sexual violence looks like. So we talked even earlier when I made the comment about even a hug, right? So sexual violence is any unwanted sexual behavior, any action used by one person against another that against to seeks and dominate them through sex, okay? And what we're talking about is, again, more of that power and control. It's just a type of violence, but the point is, all we're talking about is intimidation. We're talking about control, right? We're talking about the fact that we just want to be able to use our dominance to be able to use that in power over someone. So, how is this relevant to you, right? So, Refuge House has helped over 6,000 people last year on 17. So, that averages out about 17 people per day. Again, as we said, that 1 in 3 women report some type of violence before the age of 30, and 1 in 7 men report violence before the age of 30 as well. So, again, like I was saying earlier, we all know someone. We know multiple people. We know different people who have experienced such violence. So, when we talk about what's relevant to you, we want to get into how does this actually apply to us as a community. Like, how can we be able to recognize? How can we see? So, as I said before, who experiences violence? Violence cross-cuts every social group in our world, in our community, people of all ages, all genders, religions, orientations, sexual orientations, abilities. One of the myths that I didn't hear anyone say earlier is that even when we talk about same-sex relationships, we know that violence happens to anyone, whether it's man, woman, woman and woman, man and man. It doesn't matter what gender, race, ethnicity, whether you're a Christian or not. We know violence does occur. So whether I'm a Christian or not doesn't negate the fact that I should seek help or that I can. And the more socially marginalized an identity, the easier an abuser can manipulate. So whether that's a woman being manipulated by a man, or we're being marginalized because of financial need, we're being marginalized because of our sexual orientation, or whatever the case may be, we do know that it does happen.
Tries to control you and get you completely away from anybody else.
Yes, isolation as well. That is another one. So we know that isolation does occur. Isolation is a really good one when we talk about family, right? So we know that when we have a support system, we have people around us who support us. They're there. When I actually can isolate you from your family and your support system, this is another great opportunity to that encourages abuse amongst interactions. So absolutely. So one of my biggest things is, why don't they just leave, right? Why haven't you gotten out of this relationship? What you doing sticking around? What makes you want to be in this interaction, okay? So Most of it is that it's the most lethal time, right? Survivors have to figure out what's the way to get out. And I think it was a really good time that we actually had this conversation right now. Typically, Domestic Violence Awareness Month is in October, Sexual Assault Awareness Month is in April. But interestingly, while coronavirus is going on, COVID-19, we're at home, right? So we are at the house all day long. This is a perfect time for abuse to be going on. It's hard to leave, right? Because you're not going to work, so why you got to leave the house? So it's harder for our survivors to be able to get out and seek services, right? So you've got to find, you got to understand what is the most lethal time. Survivors have got to be able to figure out, well, when are you going to work? When are you normally going hanging out with friends? Maybe what day is it that you go check on mom, or what day is it that, you know, their abuser is out of the home, so that when is the best access for me to be able to reach services? Naturally, fear. So we're all ashamed, right? We can be scared. We don't know what that person may or may not do. We also know that when a survivor leaves, this is the most lethal time, right? Because if you're leaving, then what's happening to the abuser? If that person is decide to leave and I'm over this, I'm getting out, what's happening to that abuser at that particular point? Why is that the most lethal time? Yes, they feel rejected and they are losing control. They're losing control. So, very good. They are losing control. So at this particular point, this is the most lethal time. So this is another reason why some people don't leave. Maybe it is they hope that it will change, right? We hope that this person will see value in us. Maybe it is the connection with the children. It could be a loss of family. For many of you earlier, it could be like how I was raised, right? Our traditions. It could be maybe it's my ethnicity. It could be a lot of those reasons why. Maybe I feel like I'm being blamed. And not only that, but where do I have to go? Do I have a support system? Because it's so oftentimes that survivors will say, yeah, I have a family or friend who will put me up for the night, but to say, hey, let me stay here for the next couple weeks, that might be an imposition. Maybe it could be because of religious beliefs. Because yes, I've been taught that God loves me because I stay in my relationship. God loves me because I stay in my marriage. It could be social status, okay? I can tell you right now, I know so many people who are persons of stature, even right here within our community, but I have seen their spouses within my program. It could be that I don't have anywhere else to go. It could also be again, when we talk about the isolation, not only from family and friends, but it could be isolation from my career, right? So oftentimes I know that it could be that even with men or women, maybe you went and pursued your career. I stayed home with the children. It's been some time since I've been out into the career field, right? So now I've got to be able to establish financial stability, right? I've got to be able to establish another home, a safe place for me. Maybe you have the vehicle because you work and I stay at home all day long. So it could be a myriad of things as to the reason why survivors don't leave. So that's some of the reason why we work so hard to avoid any reasons as to why that survivor can't find healing or to be able to move from that situation. So, who are abusers? So, abusers are a small number of serial abusers. Most people are genuinely good people, right? We all try to do the right thing, but usually men in our own families and communities are normally those ones who are abusers. 90 to 95% of perpetrators are men. They can be family, acquaintances, dates, boyfriends, fiancés, spouses. It could be a myriad of things. And truthfully, yes, most men who do assault are mostly heterosexual, but there are heterosexual men that do assault homosexual men. There are homosexual men who do assault heterosexual men. There are women who do the same thing. So it has no barrier when we talk about violence and what it looks like. I don't know how many men I have counseled who are heterosexual, who identify as heterosexual, but they were sexually assaulted by other men. And they were sexually assaulted by other men who identify as heterosexual. So violence knows no lines when we talk about what happens and occurs. It's more of the power and the control. It was never so much about that individual, but it was the power and the control. One of the things that's always really, really interesting to me when we talk about abusers, so there's this organization here locally called Clothesline. And one of the things that they do is, we talk about one of the common myths when we talk about violence and sexual assault as well, that persons who have been sexually assaulted, they wanted it, right? So I was wearing clothing that was revealing. I may have, as we say in church, they had all their behind hanging out, right? So that's not true. So in a recent study I was looking at, and out of the 20 women that participated in that, 18 of the women were fully clothed from head to toe, and one woman had on a full-on hijab. So when we talk about violence, it's a power, it's a control thing, it's a status, right? Because it's not about what you were wearing, what you were doing, what you were in that moment. It was all about the fact that I needed to control the situation. I needed to be able to feel dominant in that particular moment. I needed to be able to feel the power in that particular moment. So abusers can be anyone, okay? So how does violence impact us all, right? When you hear about violence yourself, when you talk about violence to people that you know, how does it feel for you to even have that discussion? What does it even mean for you to even hear the word when you know about violence? Shame, yep. Any other thoughts? Say it again. Fear, absolutely. More importantly for me as an advocate, I always wonder, well, when will it end? When's another person that's going to say this? How many more people are going to be affected by it? But impacts of violence, these are the things that can also occur with you: sleeplessness, humiliation, as I said before, gastrointestinal issues, so our stomach. And even not only that you may not be experiencing the violence, but maybe that you are hearing the violence. So we know with children, it encourages infections, bedwetting, and stomach aches, even amongst our kids. So it's not just the fact that they are being abused, but maybe being in the home and hearing these things, right? Hearing the arguments, hearing the fighting, seeing these things, right? And not only that, but it perpetuates the violence, because I think that this is what love is. I don't know how many times I've been told by my students and even my survivors that I didn't feel like that person loved me until they hit me. I didn't feel like that person loved me until they beat me. I didn't feel like that person loved me until they treated me wrong. So often we hear that amongst our survivors. So these are some of just the long-term effects. We know that oftentimes persons who have been in violence or that have had violent situations occur, they do have long-going behavioral problems. A lot of times with women as well as men, they may become promiscuous, or it may lead to prostitution. And then, of course, they may become abusive themselves, right? Because these are the things that we're doing. These are the type of behaviors that we think are appropriate. And oftentimes people think that these things equate love. So this is the reason why we have to understand this, not only the short term of those effects, but this is long-term perpetuation of violence in our community. Just a little bit more about how it impacts us. All right. So just kind of getting in quickly, like how can you all be able to help? So as a church, again, I'm just so excited that you want to be able to provide information to our community. So we do have a 24-hour crisis hotline. Any service that you can need, that I've advised that we have, can be selected through our hotline. Our 24-hour hotline is 681-2111. That is the local number. The other is for our Taylor County hotline. They are 24 hours. If you need counseling, if you just want to talk, if it's 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., even if right now you leave here and you say, I just want to talk to somebody, whether it's about violence or not, there's always somebody there to be able to answer that phone. Again, our emergency shelters are here. The length of stay is up to 6 weeks, so they give you 45 days. We have ongoing advocates that are there and available for you. They provide food, clothing, all of the above. They link you to all the local services. You have a case manager that you're assigned to, and that person sees you from the time you come in to the time that you leave to ensure everything is needed and whatever else that you can need while you are there. So typically after 45 days, we usually have come up with some type of game plan. Unfortunately, some survivors, they just want a rest. They just want to get away from their situation. And sometimes they leave, and then we end up returning in a couple weeks to another 45 days. But that's usually dependent upon that particular survivor. We usually kind of have other transitional housing programs. We have a transitional housing program, and there are other programs here. So we try to find housing whatever that you need to be able to be in the healthiest place that you don't have to return to that relationship.
Offer counseling to both I'm talking about married couples. Do y'all organization like, because I'm sure based on counseling, what people open up to me, both husband and wife, because both of them come to me, their stories are totally different. So do you all offer counsel, as the wife say, I don't want to leave, or the husband say, I want to leave, I just want us to get some help?
No, we do not assist the abusing spouse. So what we do is we do offer the abusing person. We do have connection with local, what they call BIP, which is behavior intervention programs. And so we link the abusing person with that particular program and allow them to do that. We do have other counseling offices that are partner agencies that we encourage them that if you do want to go and seek marriage, or if you do want to go and seek counsel, you definitely can. So we offer that, but together with us, no, we only do help the actual abuse survivor.
Do you think that every minister should take a class in, or should be made aware of these particular, every pastor, every minister should be made aware of this particular, oh my goodness. Information. I'm looking at information.
Yes.
Because of what she said, the pastor tell her, go back home. She almost died.
Mm-hmm.
And typically that's what most ministers do. Go back home, the Lord will take care of it, and then the person die, and God forbid. So, I mean, from your experience, what do you think?
Yes, I do believe that they should, and I do know that there's, the clergy parishioner. You are kept at secrecy for the conversations that you have. So I feel that at least the resources are there and available. So, I've had some other clergy that were like, I had somebody who murdered someone, and at that particular point, I kind of was in a place, well, do I call law enforcement? Do I say something? Like, do I tell on them or whatever? But at that particular point, when we talk about violence, yeah, I really do. I think it would help. I also think that it gives the additional resources. And I think that that in terms of what to do after the violence happened, right? That yes, you're going to be praying for them and encouraging them to seek the Lord, but I also think that that's removed the responsibility from you to say, hey, here's trained professionals who can say, hey, this is what it is, or this is what's going on. Same thing if I came to you and said, Pastor, I got a stomach ache. Well, after a while, maybe you need to go to the emergency room or the doctor. So then that way you can say, you should just go on to the doctor. You know what I'm saying? Like at that particular point, it removes them from the responsibility there to say, hey, this is what's the next service. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. They can. Yes. So that's the reason why I said that if they don't want to, because of that scrutiny that they have, then again, hey, here's the resources that are available. But yes, the rest of us are mandated reporters. Right. Well, that's the reason why I say that, yes, I believe that, pastors and other persons in the clergy ought to be just as knowledgeable about whatever resources that are available. I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that's one of the reasons that Imitators of God has partnered with Refuge House. We understand the significance of making sure that our parishioners are aware of what's happening as far as prevention, why intervention-wide, and how to seek help. We as leaders, we are not scared to say, hey, we understand that sometimes they are not comfortable with the pastor, but we trust that in the refuge house that they give godly counsel as well, because we have our very own Jasmine on board. And just to add to what you have to say too, a lot of time men are abused as well, right? And the men too are scared to communicate as well as what is happening, because for such a long time it's always been a woman thing, a woman thing, a woman thing. Well, I have known as, a counselor myself, that there are so many times, Jasmine, that we have men as well that are abused, and sometimes the women play the victim. I'm not saying all women,
No.
but I'm just saying that we too need to show the light, not just to the women as well, but to the men, like what Sister Jan was saying. And also, one of the things I think in Christendom that the people are scared of is pastors having to talk about it. It's a long time, not just pastors, but pastors as a whole, leaders as a whole, even congregational wise, that we as Christians, we should talk about it. We should educate the other community people, not just Christians and whole here, but over here. That's why we are bringing HIV as well. A lot of times HIV, we don't want to talk about that in the church, but it's happening here. And so it is so important. Jasmine, thank you so much for bringing awareness to us as well. And even in the pandemic, I want to ask a question. Have you seen an increase during that pandemic in terms of people that are coming for help or seeking help?
No. We have not, because, and I know that again, that is because there is not the ability oftentimes to be able to seek the help, right? Because we're together, we're at home, we're always together at this point. So I think that many survivors are suffering in silence. So I've seen several campaigns. We have put out one as well. So like, for example, if survivors call like the place and they order a pizza and they don't really give you any information, then then that is something that's going on. Or if they call a retailer, if they call someone. So we're encouraging people to reach out in unconventional ways to be able to get the help and to seek the services that they need. Because as of right now, because we're home during the pandemic, a lot of our survivors, we definitely see the calls on our hotline, but we haven't seen the survivors coming in as much. Or we have seen survivors call and want the help, and they'll like secure a space. We'll hold a bed for them for 24 hours, and then they never show up. Which, we all know that certain things have happened even in our community. Again, I can't comment more so, but you all know of local stories that have happened, that survivor contacted hotline we were holding. There were certain situations, and then they were harmed fatally. So yes, So yeah, it does happen. Last couple things. So we do have youth services. They are available. We do counsel even kids. So 0 to 18, they can come in if they are being abused, or even if they just want to talk, or if they're seeking anything. And then of course I do individual counseling in terms of violence prevention, bullying, dating violence, sexual assault on the school level. Again, remember our legal services, that they are available. They can assign you and assist you with someone from legal services in North Florida. Actually, interestingly, I just did a training tutorial maybe a week or two ago with legal services in North Florida, just kind of putting it out about the services that we offer, as well as that our advocates are still, even though the courthouse is closed, our advocates are still there in our office at the Leon County courthouse. So if you need those services, they're available. We do community education like this, so if you want to educate anybody, we can still always come out. If your Boy Scout group, your Girl Scout group, your Kings and Queens conference, we can come out and talk to them about that as well. I'm sorry? Where? Domestic violence and sexual violence. We do presentations on that, healthy relationships, violence prevention, and bystander intervention. So bystander intervention is where we encourage those in our community to get involved, which is a lot of what Green Dot is in our particular program. Basically just saying this, that when we talk about violence prevention, and I go ahead and I mention that because that is actually coming up in the next slide. So we want to talk about, we mentioned before about the rape crisis. Keep going. We do have outreach counseling. Remember, that is free. But then here, how can you help? When we talk about intervention, right? So we are intervention services, but bystander intervention is also important, right? So one of the things that I talk about with our Green Dot is this, and this is also what we do from a community standpoint. Yes, the label of Green Dot is there, but bystander intervention has been around for years. That is not anything new, okay? But here's the thought process. We know that in every single violent situation, there's two people, right? Who are they? Who are they? Who are those two people in every violent situation? Right, the control and the controlled. The person who got harmed, which was the victim, and then the person who's perpetrating the violence. Well, Green Dot believes that there's actually a third person in every single violent situation. If you think about it, even in your own communities, think about right now, visualize on your street, your road, your community, your subdivision, wherever you live at. There is probably something that has happened, little old lady that was being abused by her daughter, her son, or whoever down the street, whatever the case may be. There is not one situation that has happened on this earth that was not that somebody knew, right? But why do we not step in? We talked about that earlier. Fear, shame. We don't really know what to do. So the point is, when we talk about bystander intervention, we want to come in and encourage you. How can you be able to do so safely, but to still be able to step in and intervene, right? So when we talk about intervention, we want to talk about how could we be able to be a help to our survivors. How can you check in on them safely? Maybe it's your next door neighbor that you've just been a little bit concerned about, okay? Research also says this: if you check in on an individual, they are more likely to step up and ask for help and ask for services just because they know that somebody was concerned. Not that you mentioned anything, not that you told them to go get any help, but just simply by the fact that you showed concern for their situation and, hey, I was just concerned. How you been? Are you good? Just thought I'd check in on you. Believe what believe what they're saying. Tell them that it's not their fault. And more importantly, don't ignore it. One of the things as a survivor that is so detrimental to them is to ignore it, to tell them to go home and to not worry about it. More importantly, continue to teach people that you, who you are, your body belongs to you. Trust yourself. You have the right to say no. You have the right to say no. You have the right to say no at any point in time. And then lastly, always talk to someone that you trust, whether that's coming to our clergy, whether that's coming to our pastors, right? We trust them for godly counseling. Also, when we talk about how to help, we want to talk about preventing violence, right? One of the things that's so important to me is talking about social influence causes change, right? We're socially influencing people right now. We're on a Facebook Live, we're on an Instagram Live, but we're also telling people that this is important because oftentimes our faith-based leaders, they are between those, what we want to call rock and a hard place, those controversial conversational places. And I'm so excited to be in a place that, I feel loved, I feel healthy, I feel a place, and I'm here as a parishioner where I honestly feel the love of God, right? And I have a pastor and pastors who I know that are seeking the Lord daily. But more importantly, they want to change the conversation, right? They want to have those hard conversations, talk about, well, how are we changing, right? We need to find that we are modeling what's important. That means that what we say, what we do, what we wear, how we attend things, what we display, what we do and how we model those things, people will automatically react to those things. Because when we find value in that, by you having this particular forum tonight, you are showing the other community as well as the other faith-based community how important it is to have these type of conversations, modeling that this is important. And the ultimate idea is that they will react and see the importance, right? Consider every relationship that you're in that you are modeling it. What do you want from it? Have you communicated your wants? One of the things that when we talk about violence prevention, I always encourage my survivors as well as my teams to figure out what it is that you need, right? So if you're a Christian, then hey, that's what I need. That's what I want in an interaction. I think that we can avoid violence and that we can prevent violence when we begin to find ourselves, right? If I'm a Christian, then I'm seeking God. Those are the things that are important to me. So understanding, knowing first who we are, what we are, and for the Christian, whose we are, right? So understanding who we are, I think also helps to prevent violence because then I know what is important to me, then therefore I can avoid those in that relationship. Mother has been telling me since I probably came out the womb, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So if you don't figure out you, then I think that's where we have a whole lot of different issues and problems. When someone does something that is against your values, find a way to do something, right? You want to actually react. And we normally teach that to our students through direct, delegate, and distract. We talk about being direct, right? Asking someone else for help. Or maybe just causing a quick distraction. When we talk about how can we prevent violence in our community, we want to actually be able to do so in a safe and a healthy place. And prevention, when we talk about violence prevention, it's important that, again, we model what's important to us so that others can react and find value in those things as well. And just lastly, I wanted to put up our information at Refuge House. So this is how you can reach us. That top number again, that's our 24-hour crisis hotline. That's the direct local number here. If you don't have long distance or what have you, you can call the 1-800 number. I also put the 24-hour human trafficking, because so many people are going through violence, but so many people are being human trafficked right now. Leon County is a large place for this, just this particular area. And that too is another form of violence. I didn't really get into that, but so many people are in sex slavery. So many people are in human trafficking or in human labor, and right here in this particular area. Right, even out in our rural areas of Monticello, we have so many survivors who come in the different areas that are local here. So violence is going on. These are just some other contact information for us here. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, final questions for me, or just thoughts that you have about violence? We never did get back to the wheel. We just got so enthralled, I didn't get back to the wheel, but it was supposed to be fun. Any other thoughts, concerns? No? Well, I appreciate your time and attention.
Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. Once again, can you keep your hands again and thank Jasmine for sharing with us? Jas, we appreciate you for coming here to share with us, and we try to do that twice because we know it happens all the time. And sometimes, you forget these things. So we've decided to do it twice a year. And of course, we are bringing other professionals, the areas. There are certain other areas that needs the attention also. Mental health, STD, and so on. So we have professionals who are scheduled to come here to help us. You look like you have something to tell us down the road. Okay, all right. but thank you once again, and for sure, those of you who are viewing, if you have any questions for us, send it to us at iugmtally@gmail.com. iugmtally@gmail.com. Once again, thank you so much, Judge. I really appreciate it. Can you lift your hands for the benediction, please? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Say shalom, peace. Nothing missing, nothing lacking, nothing broken. Say peace in my house, peace in my heart. Say peace on my job, peace everywhere I go. Say I'm a carrier of peace. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. You shall have what you say. Praise the Lord. God bless you. You have a wonderful evening. Thank you once again for being with us. Until next time. Bye-bye.